Just a couple more minutes. Okay, brilliant. So I think we've got a lot of people in already, and more people will join shortly, I'm sure. But let's just kick things off and say good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's BTSS Q&A on race and law. This event is now being recorded. My name is Natasha Somi, and I'm a second-year trainee at Squire Patton Boggs. I'm the co-social secretary of the Birmingham Trainee Solicitor Society. Today's discussion will focus on the following broad areas: the legal industry and POC careers, the workplace, education, and finally, allyship and intersectional activism. We are aiming to wrap this up by 7:30, so we will try and keep each section short and sweet, including any Q&A. Before we get started, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping points so you know how to participate in today's event, and for those of you that have managed to escape any type of Zoom call. If you are in the audience, please make sure you're on mute and ideally turn your videos off. This is to make sure that the panel stay at the top of the speaker grid and so that we can all see who's speaking. Thank you to all of you who have submitted questions ahead of today's event. They have been incorporated into the structure of our topics. At any time during the discussion, you'll have the opportunity to submit your questions in via the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. You can send those questions in to all, and that means everybody in attendance today can see your question, or you can privately send your question to the BTSS, where my colleague Charlotte will pick up your question and log that for myself to see. We will do our best to answer as many questions and incorporate them as best we can, and we will likely group similar questions. If anyone has a burning desire to add to the discussion today, you can raise your hand using the option underneath the participants button. And if we have time, we'll invite you to unmute yourself and briefly contribute. We will be recording this discussion and it will be uploaded on our website after the event. Finally, even though this is a conversation about law and the legal industry and routes into this career, it is also about people's personal experience. So please remember to keep it polite and respectful. Thanks very much. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the speakers. First, we have representing the graduate networking platforms, Ashley Alley, who is a coaching and mentoring specialist at Aspiring Solicitors, the UK's leading diversity and inclusion talent development platform within law. Before joining AS, she was a commercial lawyer at international law firm Freshfields Brookhouse Derringer. Thank you for joining us, Ashley. We also have Shelley O'Gleavy. Shelley is the campus membership manager at Bright Network. Bright Network have partnered with over 250 leading employers, including top law firms, to help connect students with graduate roles. So thank you both for joining.
Thanks so much.
Welcome, thanks for having us.
Representing the bar, we have Malvika Yeager-Mohan, who is a family law and matrimonial finance barrister from St Ives Chambers in Birmingham. Malvika also supports a notable cause about mental health awareness in the legal industry and has her own blog, Stiff Upper Lip, which highlights the importance of wellness amongst lawyers. Also representing the bar, we have Joel Semakula, who is a pupil barrister from Landmark Chambers in London. Growing up in a council block in Stratford, he has had a fascinating route into this industry, clerking in a criminal set, turning down an undergraduate law degree at Oxford to go and study in the States, to then go on to work at Wall Street, finally coming back to the UK to complete his degree at Oxford, working in-house for Shell, and then finally ending up at Landmark Chambers as a pupil barrister. So welcome both.
Thank you.
And representing the solicitors, we have a partner from Brown Jacobson, Bridget Tatham, who specialises in employer liability and public liability defence and manages a caseload of complex and high value claims, ranging from occupational disease to life-changing brain and spinal injuries. From Anthony Collins, we have Senior Associate Michelle Knight, who acts for local authorities in all aspects of their property transactions, including large-scale regeneration schemes. Michelle is also a champion of BAME at her firm, providing support and advocacy on these issues and for employees at the firm. From Evershed Sutherland, we have Corinne Kerlew, who is a senior associate within the corporate occupiers team. She advises on all aspects of property law for landlords and tenants, including disposals and acquisitions. Corinne is a frequent speaker at external events and is a member of the Global Diversity Steering Group. She is also a professional ambassador for aspiring solicitors. Also from Evershed Sutherland, we have Sharon Nath, who is a trainee solicitor. Sharon has completed seats within real estate, residential development, health and safety. She's currently a third seat trainee with the Commercial Disputes Resolution team and has paralegal experience in commercial disputes resolution and employment. Welcome both. From Square Pattern Boggs, we have Mariam Haruna, who is an associate in the commercial litigation team and a committee member of the Birmingham Law Society. Mariam has experience advising on a wide range of matters in contract, tort, which include breach of warranty, misrep, defamation, professional negligence, debt recovery, and insurance. And last but not least, we have Kurjit Takkar, who is also an associate at Squires in the property litigation team. Kurjit is experienced in a wide range of real estate litigation matters, and she also has significant telecommunications industry expertise. So welcome all of you, and thank you so much for joining us on this panel today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think a great way to kick this off is to talk about the legal industry and careers into law. And I think a notable case that's come up in the news recently is to do with Alexandra Wilson, who is a Black barrister and was mistaken 3 times in one day as a defendant in the courts when in fact she was there in her role as a barrister. And she's received an apology from the court, and the courts have said that they're going to investigate the matter. But what struck me was that in 2020, we are still seeing this level of ignorance and sort of disrespect. And I just wanted to open this up to the panel and ask whether or not you found this surprising, this story, or not. Malvika, you're shaking your head there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, no, it's not surprising at all. And I think any of the Black barristers who commented on Alex's thread and said that they've experienced something similar, it wasn't surprising to them either. And it's a structural problem, really, which Abby Johnson, who's I think at 25 Bedford, wrote a really good thread on Twitter about how Alex getting mistaken for a defendant 3 times is a symptom of the underlying problem, which is an overrepresentation of Black people in the criminal justice system. So it's systemic. It's not surprising at all. What I probably say, and I tweeted this as well, is that I think that it's very important not to conflate the experiences of all non-white people off the back of this story, because even though I'm in the BAME category, I think the particular racism experienced by Black people is very specific, and I think it's lacking in nuance to conflate all of our experiences. So I did see some, Asian barristers chiming in and saying, well, this has happened to me too, and I've been mistaken for an interpreter or something like that, which is, of course you've got to be heard, and of course that matters, but I felt like it slightly derailed the conversation, and I think that in being effective allies, you have to resist the urge to chime in and go, well, I know what this feels like too, because you might in a certain respect, but not really.
And actually, it's a really great point you mentioned, and it's come up in some of the questions that came through earlier in the week. Do we think the term BAME or POC tends to conflate everybody's experience, and is that something that we should be mindful of then, even considering it in sort of the workplace and our own professions when we're tackling this issue?
I think it makes stats look better than they are. So we can say stuff like BAME statistics for recruitment or whatever, that they've gone up. And if that is the case, it might be based on like one particular minority, and it might give an overall illusion or impression that things are better than they are, when things might not have changed at all or have got even potentially worse for certain minorities. So to just say BAME, I think kind of masks that sort of thing, which is problematic.
And I think if we take that, so let's look at the bar. If you look at the number of BAME barristers, statistics say there's about 13.5% of BAME barristers as against a total population of about 14.5%. So those numbers don't look that bad, actually quite impressive relative to a lot of other professions. But if you draw that down, for example, to Black barristers, then what you're looking at is something that looks very different. So if we're talking about 16,500 barristers in the UK, according to the latest figures from the BSB, about 3,300 of those are BAME. 1,500 of those roughly are Asian and mixed, while only about 480 barristers are actually black. And so this difference gets even greater when you get to the silk level, where you're talking about, I think it's about 149 BAME QCs, and 20 of those are black. And so when we're addressing these problems as a whole, we do need to address why these differences are so stark, even between this group that we all seem to put under one umbrella all the time.
And it's the same with the SRA data for solicitors. So you've got 21% BAME in the legal profession, but then you drill that down, it's 3% black. And that hasn't changed, I don't think, for a number of years. Whereas I think with Asian lawyers, that has, I think it's currently standing at about 17%, and that's gone up from year on year, albeit slowly year on year, but it's still a percentage that's above the percentage of Asian people in the workforce generally. So yes, it's the same issue. So you do actually have to strip the issues out and drill down. We've had that debate about BAME. It's a government data tool, isn't it? Nothing more, nothing less, and it makes us a homogenous lump, which we are not. And then how far do you drill down? So, you know, black isn't just black, is it? There's Africans, there's African Caribbeans, Asians isn't just Southern Asian and so forth. So how far do you drill down? But we do need that minutiae in order to be able to make change.
And what's interesting that you've all sort of touched on as well is the kind of, as you go up through the sort of layers in career and sort of the next stages, that figure gets smaller and smaller, and especially so when you're looking at the figures for black lawyers as well. And actually in an interview on Radio 4 last month, Alexandra Wilson, she actually spoke about the stats as you get higher, you know, for barristers up to QC, for lawyers, you know, to partner. Ashley, I'm interested to know from your point of view, once you have managed to get trainees into firms and they're into their legal careers, what does the retention rate look like? I mean, what's reported back to you from the perspective of those individuals staying in the legal industry, and what impacts those decisions to stay or to leave?
Yeah, I think obviously we're going to hear this a lot, that it's obviously very complex. I think there are a whole host of reasons as to why, and again, we need to be very specific when we talk about BAME, so black specifically. The statistics are showing that black candidates are more likely to leave a lot sooner than their white peers, and also their kind of AME peers as well. And you and I spoke about this when we had our phone call a while ago, and I think there are a lot of issues, but if I were to drill it down to anything, and this is speaking with my kind of aspiring solicitor's hat and the feedback that I've got from, you know, candidates that I work with, but also my hat that was a previous lawyer and have been in these kinds of situations and buildings, I think that, you know, sadly, it is very difficult for BAME candidates to thrive in environments that, frankly, haven't been designed for them or with them in mind. And until we start to really kind of, you know, address that and speak openly about that and start listening to the candidates who are there already, we're unfortunately not going to get very far. That's not to be very kind of, you know, defeatist. But I think that's where we're up to. We really need to start paying attention to these candidates, and they are feeling, I myself have felt, you know, that I am not represented, I'm not seen in these environments, and that's a big issue.
Thank you. And Michelle, as a senior associate, I'm assuming that you have had trainees under you and junior lawyers under you as in your role. Does it surprise you to hear some of this information in terms of career navigation, or is this something that you're familiar with seeing in your role?
I supervise trainees, juniors and associates, and it depends on the individual. If they are the majority, and I'll say white trainees, juniors, assistants, they understand how to progress in their career and the things that are required. Unfortunately, it's not very often that I come across a trainee or a newly qualified solicitor or a junior solicitor that is of black origin. And when I have, it has been very much the onus on me as this more senior person to explain to them how the game is played. And I think one of the things that I press upon them is, it is one thing to get your degree and your qualifications. It is another thing to learn how to thrive in the career profession. And a lot of people settle for coping and don't unfortunately have the opportunity, like we are having today, to talk to other lawyers who have been through this, to share our experiences of how you can actually thrive. I think I understand the underrepresentation. I understand the prove it again, that, you know, you're held to a higher criteria in terms of the quality of the work that you produce, the number of clients that you bring in, the networks that you have. And I'm not going to deny that. And I think if we do deny it, we are belittling the next level of candidates coming through. But I also believe in there's opportunities like this that we can be, as senior, more experienced lawyers, to be sponsors and to be mentors and to help them navigate this road. It's not a one conversation, it's not a one case file. It is a journey that you have to go on with an individual as to how they can map out their career success.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really interesting point. And I'd be interested to hear, Bridget, from your point of view as a partner, and you are a coveted person right now, because I certainly found it very difficult, and I know my fellow BTSS committee members found it very difficult to find partners and senior lawyers to partake in today's event, which is proof of the pudding, really, in terms of how much there is still a lot of change that needs to happen. Does it surprise you that we're still having these sorts of conversations today about the need for more representation, not only at the senior level, but also at the junior level as well?
Bluntly, no. I suppose if I was asked, does it sadden me? Yes, that we're still having the same conversation as I had when I started out. I won't tell you how long ago, but many moons ago. I'll just put it that way. But no, it doesn't surprise me. There are a number of senior Black lawyers that are in, I'm in the Birmingham market, and who are great role models, I think, but there are far few of us. There was quite an interesting meeting that we called, because I'm part of it's now called the REACH committee. It was called the BAME subcommittee of Birmingham Law Society, and we called a meeting with the senior leaders in the Birmingham legal market. And what was great about that meeting was that there were obviously a spattering of senior white people, but there was also a spattering of senior Black lawyers who are partners, head of office, and taking the mantle of EDI on behalf of those people that they want to bring up. Michelle's point in terms of sponsoring people. But no, so straight answer, no, I'm not surprised that we're still having the conversation, but I'm glad that there are more open conversations. It feels as if there's some real drive to actually change and be held to account. And I just think that we've got an open door to hold these organisations to account. And it's not just about what we're doing individually, but it's this, it's systemic, isn't it? So you could be the most fantastic lawyer ever and shine, but if you are competing against a white fantastic ever lawyer who also shines, you're not going to get that opportunity, or it's less likely you're going to get the opportunity to have access to the clients, because that's how you get up the slippery pole. You have to have those opportunities presented to you to demonstrate your talents. And if you're stopped or not given that, well, then what do? I think it's called the stay gap, isn't it now, Ashley? This idea that people come in and then after about 2.5 years, not even 5 years, they disappear and go in-house somewhere, missing out on all those other opportunities. So it's about doing something about the system, I think, and the structural issues, as well as Michelle's point, us encouraging and sponsoring.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think we'll touch on a little bit of that a little bit later in terms of the intersect as well, because obviously we're talking about people of colour trying to get to more senior levels and be able to be leveled up the system, but at the same time for women as well, we have that cross section of it's. When I look at certain structures, I also struggle to see women at the table as well, and this duality of systems of oppression is something that I think can sometimes fall through the cracks a bit. And I know that that's been brought to our attention in the questions, and we'll touch on a bit more. Just zooming in now then, I suppose, to the workplace, and focusing in a bit on actually law firms and chambers and the structures that exist within those spaces. When we did our social media poll on Instagram to ask our members about what their thoughts were about talking about race within the workplace and the sorts of supports that existed there, it didn't paint the best view. People obviously feel more comfortable speaking with their family and friends about these issues, less so in the workplace. And a question that's come up quite a few times is, why is it so difficult to speak about these factors at work? Why is it that these conversations make people so uncomfortable? And what can we do to encourage more open discussion? And I think one of the first things that I wanted to ask, and perhaps Shelley, you might have a view on this, is at the very early stages of trying to get students into the legal profession and to diversify at that stage. What does that look like currently in terms of those statistics?
Yes, so in terms of, yes, sorry, could you repeat the last part of your question again in terms of?
So in terms of getting students into sort of law career roles, what do the statistics look like right now?
Yes, sorry. So in terms of I think this would be a good time actually to flash up our slide on the first slide about our network, just so you can get an idea of kind of our membership and the breakdown with that, which we believe is quite reflective. So when you're looking at kind of our network and the BAME candidates within, when you drill down, about 33% of that is Black heritage, and about 14,000 of those are state educated. So that pool that often find the most difficulty in kind of accessing those top senior roles, and are actively looking for those roles and actively looking for those employers that they can be engaging with. Around 6,000 of those are particularly kind of striving for those degrees and those opportunities within law. And what we're finding from them and the barriers that they're facing is just not understanding what it is. And this kind of echoes what a couple of people were saying earlier in the session. It's really more around kind of their understanding of the market and understanding of what they need to do to be able to shine. One of the things that we're hearing across the board, not just from our kind of members who are leaving university and going into those kind of entry level law roles, but also going into kind of those that have been in their graduate positions for 18 months to 2 years, is really that they don't understand that progression point, or that kind of, they don't have the knowledge to be confident. They don't have the knowledge to understand that there are those opportunities for them, or that those opportunities even apply to them. And they're just uncertain of what it is that employers are really looking for from them, and what they can be doing to be that golden application, or be that kind of great lawyer, or build that great career. And the fact that they don't know that, they feel almost as they feel kind of shut out of that the whole kind of conversation around it, and don't know how to position themselves in the best way to then get ahead, which then just kind of pushes them down and pushes them back in the way that they're less likely to strive for those roles, or less likely to even kind of put their hat in the ring, because they just don't see themselves or someone like them really represented doing the same thing, or have the knowledge to do it with confidence.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think, Sharon, as someone who is closest to the junior end of the spectrum, as your role as a paralegal and as a trainee, do you think that sense of sometimes not fitting in, or sometimes having to alter yourself slightly to be able to fit in, is true enough for those at the junior end of things in the workplace?
Yeah, it definitely is for me. I, for many years as a paralegal and now second year trainee, I would say I kind of had a split personality, one for work and one that's me. I would not say things, I would misrepresent details about my life, not get involved in conversations, be second guessing anything I say, anything, expressing an interest in something, disliking something I eat, music, just everything is like regulated and filtered before it comes out. And there's a lot of isolation that comes with being in that position and feeling like you constantly have to just be someone else. Or I feel like an imposter, and that I would don't want to be found out for who I really am. So if I just kind of shy away enough, blend in, they won't catch me. Is kind of how it's felt, particularly when I was paralegaling. And all the things you say, Shelley, about, you know, not having the confidence, not knowing how to act, like where the opportunities are, whether you could achieve them. I think there's loads of disadvantages that come from a really like young age, that you either become more and more equipped and able to break into a career like law, and you have loads of support around you and people are telling you how to do things, and you kind of know where to go and what's next, and you've got that kind of support around you, and it's just like one step to the next. Or you can be on the opposite end of that, which is where I found myself, where you don't know, and at every kind of hurdle there is barrier on barrier on barrier. You feel like you have to jump over like 5-6 more hurdles to achieve the same thing. Yeah, so it is quite complicated, and it's very, very difficult to navigate.
I'd be really
kind of, sorry, I was just going to echo on what Sharon was saying as well. So on the next slide that we had, Charlotte, you can see like what you were saying around the barriers. One of our latest research, which comes out yearly on what graduates want, and one of the things that our graduate members always have flagged to us, and it's been growing over the years, which is sad to see, is that the number of them feeling hindered by their backgrounds in applications, in their roles and everything is growing. And particularly when you look at Black heritage, about half of our members are feeling that way and feeling kind of hindered by their backgrounds throughout the process, compared to when you look at the overall network, which is 28%. Like it's a really big leap across the Black heritage students in particular. But yeah, just to kind of really drives home that point that Sharon was saying around those barriers being at every point, and once you kind of jump a hurdle, there's another hurdle. And there was something that Sharon, you were saying that really flagged to me as well, around the knowledge. So I think sometimes from an employer perspective, it can seem as though like you're doing your best to kind of make sure that it's competitive, obviously, to get into your firm, and that people really do have to show that they're at a high level to be able to get in there. And that's obviously, that's understandable, that makes sense. But at the same time, I think realizing from an employer perspective that not everybody will have access to that same pool of information and that pool of like insider knowledge that really helps people excel and look like they're at that higher level isn't accessible to everyone. So making the process and making the letting that knowledge of what it is to be a star player, what it is to be a golden kind of character within a firm, making that a little bit more transparent and a little bit more open doesn't make the kind of process into getting into that company easier. It just means that those people, it levels the playing field across those different kind of members who haven't had that in their process into landing those positions.
That's so useful. Thank you so much, Shelley. And I think actually understanding better how employers can be more open to those sorts of candidates is really, really useful, because often initiatives are driven potentially without that knowledge. And so they're not meeting the best needs of people. Ashley, would you agree with those views about how employers can better help graduates trying to secure contracts or pupilages?
Yeah, completely. And actually, that's something that we work on specifically at Aspiring Solicitors. So we work with candidates in a kind of real holistic way. So I think, you know, I think it was Michelle that said about just kind of how to play the game. People just don't always know how to play the game. So it's working on it from both sides of things. So with our candidates, we work with them, we kind of give them that coaching and employability techniques, but then we're also working from the kind of law firm side as well to ensure that law firms are understanding of how their recruitment processes are kind of favouring certain sections of society, whether it be through a Watson Glaser test, whether it be through, you know, even, you know, a lot of law firms use kind of contextual recruitment processes, but that doesn't help the candidate who has got this far but still doesn't know how to kind of shine and still hasn't picked up the pieces that other people have naturally just been exposed to, which I think Sharon also had touched on. I think it's really important as well to mention that kind of intersectionality and how that plays a part. You know, for example, Black candidates from low socioeconomic backgrounds are going to be disadvantaged much more. But to kind of bring it back to what it was you were saying from the employer side of things, I think definitely there's a lot that they can be doing. I think a lot of law firms are starting to recognise that and acknowledge that, but unless they are being guided by, you know, the people that they have, BAME candidates, employees that they have in their law firms, and really kind of creating an environment where they are truly listening to those people, and that people feel comfortable enough to kind of, you know, give up that information, these processes are not going to come up to the standard that they need to be, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I remember we spoke briefly about statistics, and sometimes there's a bit of a reluctance to share stats when it comes to, you know, number of women that are hired, number of BAME individuals that are hired, any disabilities, things like that. Why is it, do you think, that there is such a reluctance at very key stages? So, you know, and I remember when I was looking for a training contract, I really struggled to find those stats for most law firms that I was applying to. And that was actually guiding some of my decisions on that. Why do you think there's, and I couldn't really understand truly at that point why there was a reluctance to give that information up. Does anyone have any view on that?
Well, it's nice that in the solicitor's profession, there's even the prospect of you getting diversity data from firms, because at the start, that's not going to happen, really. I can remember I go to quite a few of these panels on the same subject, and quite a few people ask the panelists, you know, do you make it a criterion, a diversity criterion when you're applying to chambers? And quite frankly, if I was applying on the basis of diversity, there would have been about 1.5 chambers I could have applied to. So I think the bar slightly relies on the fact that we're self-employed, we don't have HR teams, we don't have the resources or the time to put that data together, and there probably needs to be more of an internal drive to go, actually, that's not enough, and the occasional BSB diversity report doesn't really capture the full picture. But that's on us, really, because we won't have anyone pushing us to do it.
Yeah. Oh, Joel, I think you're on mute, but I think you agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I said, well, that's unless clients start pushing for it more. That's, you know, one of the key ways that if that's an important goal, especially at the bar. Those of you, for example, who work in property law, commercial, or some of those areas, I mean, the number of times you've probably ever encountered a Black or BAME barrister in that period or something, where I mean, I just think that is one potential way that the profession as a whole, if we think about law as a whole, is, you know, clients can really push for that from their barristers and the chambers.
That is such a good point, because we, you know, I deal with tenders. You tender for, you know, chunks of business. And more commercial clients are asking you not just about what you're doing about your carbon footprint, but particularly around diversity and inclusion, and what does your data. So we have to have our data. It doesn't look good, but you have to start from somewhere. And I think your point about why is it that we don't want to, why is it that organizations don't want to openly talk about their data, is because it doesn't reflect well on them. And also, if you do that, you're sort of saying to people that we want to do something about it. So in other words, you're going to be, it's a benchmark that you're setting, you're advertising it, and somebody can go back to you and say, well, actually, it was only 3% 2 years ago. What have you done? Because it's interesting, there's a lot of organizations who are spending a lot of money on ED&I, and then you look at their data, you just think, you've got some deep pockets, and what are you doing with your money? So is it just window dressing?
Yeah.
So I take your point about, and it's interesting to hear from Bright Network and aspiring lawyers about the, you know, the individual, what they have to do to shine. But I'm also very interested in what organizations should be doing to encourage, you know, and change their recruitment practices. And once somebody's in, what they're doing to ensure that people have equality of opportunity to go up the ranks and retain talent. So I do wonder whether part of the conversation is there is more for organizations to do to be receptive to a diverse workforce. And I think that that's the driver. And if we're not, all you young people who I can't see could be as shiny as possible, but nothing's going to change if organizations don't change how they're looking at talent.
And just to chime in on what you were saying there around what employers can be doing more, it is really that kind of not, you touched on it slightly when you said about the kind of ED&I initiatives that all these firms are putting into place and kind of showing, putting all this kind of resource into it, but not having much to show for it. And that's the kind of thing that employers need to be avoiding, not this kind of checkbox thing. They feel as though, oh, we have to share about our diversity stats now. But again, they have that feeling of, oh, I don't want to share it because it's going to make us look bad. But if you're really passionate and understand the value of diversity within your business, and it is such a valuable aspect to the whole business, being able to really put that up and kind of put that what's the kind of onus on yourself to kind of live up to that and own up to your shortfalls and where there is a bit of a lack of diversity in your company, that puts the responsibility on them to then go out and kind of make that change, in terms of making it so that it's not a tick box exercise where they're just saying, okay, yeah, so we wanted 50% or 30% more kind of Black heritage or BAME candidates applying for our 2020 intake, for example. It's not just kind of filling a quota, it's actually changing the whole way that the application process looks. And again, like we mentioned, and as Sharon and I were talking about earlier, and Ashley as well, changing that kind of the process to suit those different types of candidate as well, so that naturally they're coming and more attracted to your to apply for your firm, but also making sure that both when they get into the company that it reflects and it is transparent where those where the firm's values lie. So if they get into, there's no point kind of bringing all this great wonderful Black talent in and then they get there and there's nobody looks like them or no one in the senior positions that looks like them, because that's when you'll get the kind of, you'll lose that retention and people will leave. So it's really changing the mindset and not just putting in quotas and thinking about, oh, how can we get some more diverse talent in? It's more, how do we become a more diversity focused and championing society really within the company. Yeah, I don't want to go, I can talk a lot about that, but I don't want to go on too much. But yeah, that's essentially kind of where they need to start. And as you can see on the screen as well, upskilling is going to be a really key part of that, because that's one thing that members are really screaming out to us for, and even alumni as well. When I say alumni, I mean people who have left university, who are going into kind of their early careers. Upskilling is such a key part of that, because without the direct upskilling from employers, it's great for people like Ashley and myself to be doing it with members and with students, but they need it from the lawyers themselves, and that's where all that transparency and that's where all of that kind of insider knowledge comes into play.
Thank you so much, and that's such great insight at that junior level and getting those students in. I'm really keen to hear from maybe some of the associates, Mariam, Kulji, about what it's like. So you've been a junior, you've been an NQ, you've probably got a couple of years under your belt. What does support look like for your sort of career development at that sort of stage as a lawyer within solicitors firms?
I think I would say, from my perspective, I think it probably does depend on the firm that you are at, but I find that actually, if you yourself show that you are working hard and you've got your ideas as to what it is that you're trying to achieve, if you've got a brand that you're trying to build yourself, a profile that you're trying to build, and you're quite clear as to what it is that you want to achieve ultimately, and you let that be known, then as long as, I think if you're in the right firm in any event, you will get the support to allow you to achieve those aims. And that's how it's been for me. I've let it be clear as to the things that I'm interested in and what it is that I want to achieve, and I've shown people that I have got the capability to do those types of things, and then I think once you have done that, you kind of do get the support around you to either point you in the right directions as to go and speak to this person about this area of law, or perhaps do some training on this, or get yourself out there more. You can, I think it's what you make of it and how you try and engage in the process yourself. I do think there are probably some instances where you may have supervisors around you that maybe don't seem interested, or just maybe they're just have gotten to a stage where it's been so long ago since that they were in your shoes that they can really understand some of the kind of issues that you're facing, and some of the concerns that you might have, and how things might be difficult for you in terms of progressing. And I think if you are in those instances, I think there's always there's probably someone else in the firm that you can speak to, or maybe in other firms, and just trying to find some kind of mentor in that respect, because I actually think probably the more senior you are, the more, or at least definitely in the firm that I'm in, the more you do get in terms of trying to really mold you into that, what are your specialisms going to be? Where, if you're looking to be partner, how are you going to get there? Are you thinking about how you're going to bring clients in, that kind of thing? So I think, because obviously that's the upward trajectory you're looking at, senior associate partner or director, something like that. So yeah, I actually think it's quite good in terms of the support you get the more senior you get. Cordy, I don't know, would you agree, or would you?
I think that's fair to say. I think it does really depend on the actual organisation that you're within. I've had the luxury of being at various organisations, sort of private practice, in-house, and government. So it's I've got quite a wide range of cross section on the sort of ideas and what goes on within certain organisations. And I can say, I've had the hard route because I've paralegaled. I did everything under the sun, because I actually did my LPC and the market bottomed out, which was just unfortunate. But it didn't deter me. I mean, ultimately, if you want to get to where you want to get to, you have to, I know it's hurdle upon hurdle, but actually it makes you a stronger person, and it's knowing who you can speak to in terms of your mentors, but also just being outspoken as well, and not being afraid to actually genuinely know what you are worth. And it is about your self-worth and actually going with that. And I can say, in one of the organizations that I did do a training, applied for a training contract, and that particular partner wouldn't basically look at anyone who didn't look like him. And I actually challenged that, but not on the grounds of race. I challenged it on fairness. And actually it brought about change within the HR structure, and actually, making a change for someone else that came after me, and actually helping those people, it's not about what you look like, and making it a fairer system where you wouldn't have, two people from the same team, one who was senior and one who was junior, because ultimately the junior person will never ever go against the senior person, because they've got an ultimate agenda, because they want to be promoted. So from that perspective, it is about leveling the playing field and actually being outspoken and not being afraid to do that. But it was one thing that was never spoken about. It was all hush hush, and then as soon as I called it out, it was changed, which is, I'm glad that I've managed to do that for somebody else. But it takes a lot of courage to do that. It's not easy. And that's going back 6 years ago. So it's a long time. There is a massive change from when I first started to now, and people are actually openly having these conversations.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, one of the questions that came up ahead of today's event was the whole idea of speaking out and having the courage to speak out. And especially if you are a junior, not being able to. And we put the question to our Instagram followers about whether there should be anonymous reporting on either end of sort of reporting on situations that happen within the firm, to give employees the kind of comfort to be able to do that. And we had unanimous across the board that yes, it should be that even HR don't know who's reporting it, but if people want to speak out, there should be a system where there can be sort of a tip line. That's how much people wanted to be able to speak out but felt they couldn't. Corinne, I could see you sort of nodding your head through both Mariam and Korjit's points there. Do you agree that speaking out it's kind of crucial and but yes, a challenge?
Yeah, totally. Personally, there are things that come up or that you realise as you're kind of going up and you're getting more mature and you're thinking about where you want to be, or you're thinking about the next steps, or you're thinking about moving on and promotion. When it comes to managers, it might just be that you start to actually realise that your manager might be more of a passive manager than an active manager. And when you look at somebody else, their managers may be giving them a bit more opportunity or helping them or assisting them in a way that maybe your manager isn't. And that could just be down to management style. It could just really be something as simple as that. Or it could be that actually, you know, personally, I felt like I needed to then up my game somehow to get that same help and experience. So whether that was actually getting the attention of a different partner who I worked with and I worked with really closely, and building a relationship with her, and her seeing something in me and actually spending or offering to spend the time to have a coffee or to do this or to do that, and me using her as a mentor, even though she wasn't my line manager, to ask those questions around what do I do, or how do I approach this, or, you know, I've got no idea of how I tactically have that conversation or whatever, because she was somebody that I felt comfortable and open enough to kind of help me strategize as to how I wanted to get pieces of work or how I wanted to get involved with certain things. But yes, there are maybe tactical ways that you maybe need to approach different things. I mean, personally, work allocation was something that I felt that I had to tactically approach some seniors in my team about in one of my development reviews, and I probably went through that conversation a million times in my head about how I wanted to approach that and what exactly I wanted to say, because in my mind I didn't want it to kind of come across a certain way, if that makes sense. But inevitably, you know, sometimes there are individuals that you know, work quite closely with maybe seniors, and, you know, might be favourites, you know, whatever the case might well be, and they get, you know, some of the glamorous, you know, work or projects, and sometimes it's just getting access to that. So you can ask the question, and if it's not forthcoming, sometimes, you know, what do you then do? And it was just really about tactically showing that senior that, you know, you'd promised me the last job, and that last job had gone to X. And, you know, just reiterating in the right way my passion, my enthusiasm, my willingness to want to get involved and to really want to get the next big one that landed. And I guess through doing that and having that conversation, and, you know, some others really tactically, I've not kind of burnt any bridges with anybody, but I've also brought certain issues to the forefront. Which has actually then been a good thing, because someone's actually checked themselves or realised something, and then gone, oh, well, actually, you're right, and I will change that. Or actually, the next one, Corinne, I'm going to make that my point of duty that we work on together. Yeah, or the next project that comes in, actually, I'll run it and you'll support me on it and we'll do it together. So that's, again, how I've done it, but I've done it in not the approach of either being, you know, aggressive or too forefront. I've kind of tactically tried to show maybe where some behaviours might be repeating themselves, like I said, the work allocation point, and how that might be affecting other people in the team, and how that might make people in the team feel. Again, bringing a bit of a motive to that, and then them actually realising that there's maybe a wider issue or something that we maybe need to look at, because it's not on purpose. It's just that, you know, John was used to working with Sarah, I'm making these names up, by the way, all the time, because they sat next to each other, and naturally it was just, you know, because of their working relationship or where they sat, that's the work that they, you know, always got involved in. But to the exclusion maybe sometimes of somebody else who's really, really keen, really, really capable, and wants to get a piece of that pie, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Joel, what does being outspoken look like to you in terms of at the bar? Is it a similar sort of, does it look the same as how Corinne has mentioned it, or is it a little bit of a different structure within your industry?
So when we opened this up, you spoke about Alex and obviously the tweet that she made that made national news. And now if you spend a bit of time on those tweets, look at the comments, if you look at the amount of abuse that Alex has received as a result of that, it's really quite chilling if you think about whether as a professional reader, as a barrister, anyone, you really want to be speaking out about these experiences. So that's the one hand about, you see there just very clearly identified the danger as a person of color, as a professional person of color, of speaking out. I mean, in terms of the other big thing, the big concern or issue we have is, you know, we're self-employed at the bar, so you know, we operate within these firms, but you know, we're a lot more at the mercy of solicitor clients and lay clients, and don't have the firm structures necessarily to support us. So I think it becomes much more difficult within this environment to speak out if you've got issues, for example, around work allocation or around recruitment or around progression and retention. I mean, you know, the chambers should be creating structures in place, and the BSB does regulate to some extent to try and support that work. But I do think it's much more difficult than being in some of the more employed environments. I've worked in a few big firms, and I think there's a lot more room within that. At least you feel a little bit more protected when you do that. And I think it's something the BSB is having to deal with, and barristers kind of deal with throughout their whole career. And that's why I think you see silks and QCs seem much more willing to have these conversations, and I think junior tenants are willing to.
Yeah, it's again that structural impact as well on who speaks up and who's able to speak up a little bit. Malvika, would you agree with Joel's points there?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's particularly acute at the junior end when you're a pupil, because I know a lot of pupils, non-white pupils, who have maybe heard members of chambers or more senior colleagues, including me, say something that doesn't sit right with you, but you don't feel like you can say anything, because when you're a pupil, you're convinced that if you make someone's coffee wrong, that they're not going to give you tenancy. So the idea that you might actually call someone out on something slightly racist that they've said, not going to happen. I think Alex's book actually has some good examples of it, of her in situations where she's with someone in court, they say something relatively inappropriate, but she doesn't know what to do, because what can she do, really? What I will say is the minute I became a tenant and I realized it's really difficult to get kicked out of chambers, I did start becoming way more outspoken. And I took to Twitter pretty much the moment after I finished my tenancy interview, and I was like, yeah, I've got it. I'll go on Twitter and start tweeting everything I've ever thought. But I think I do not criticize anyone who feels unable to speak, because it takes a huge toll, and I don't think they owe anyone anything. And I think it's interesting that several people in this panel have talked about playing the game, and I think that playing the game sometimes means not upsetting the apple cart, because you don't want people to make your life more difficult than it already is. Hashi Mohammed has written a really good book called People Like Us, and he has whole chapters on kind of code switching and the tension between, you know, wanting to join a system, but then having to fit yourself around the system. And should you have to fit yourself around the system to be in the system, surely you should be doing, you know, whatever you want, being true to yourself. It's very easy to say. But I think the reality is sometimes we play the game, we keep quiet, because the system has to look a little bit different before you can start feeling able to speak up. And it maybe won't look so different if you don't get into it in the first place. And you won't get into it in the first place if you don't play the game.
Absolutely, perfectly put.
Can I just add to that really quickly, just one point that I don't think has been mentioned either, and I think it's quite difficult at times, whether or not you're senior or junior, there's always this kind of something like kind of looming, which makes you feel like you might be accused of playing the race card as well. And I know, like, circumstances when I was practicing, there were definitely things that I perhaps should have spoken out about, but did not, through fear of someone saying, well, you're playing the race card, and you know, this people assume or kind of putting the onus on us to kind of to prove that something has been racist when it shouldn't really be that way around. And you know, you have to prove that a remark, you know, someone coming into the office and I don't know, saying wagwan to me when I'm half Nigerian, so first of all that just makes no sense. But these kinds of things they're quite hard to articulate, and it might just be small things that have kind of happened along the way, but formatively these are racist things. I don't want to be the angry black woman, or I don't want to be accused of playing the race cards. I think that's another thing that we definitely should be mindful of as well.
I would definitely second that, actually, because I've been very conscious about not wanting to be the angry black woman, or even turning into her at times when I'm feeling very frustrated internally. But then I guess there's been a will in me, or something still pushed me at times, once I found the confidence, obviously, because I'll be a lie if I said to you I walked in at day one you know, at any of the firms I've worked in, and that I, you know, was quite happily able and willing to approach a number of these issues. I wasn't. It's been over time, and it's been once I've found my confidence, it's been once I've, you know, kind of solidified my position in teams and gained lots of respect and so forth and stuff from my colleagues and from seniors, where actually I felt, well, actually now I have the position, because people will listen to me, of actually being able to show a different perspective or a different experience or a different angle from, you know, from a topic or from an issue where somebody clearly in my team doesn't have, because the majority of my team comes from a very different either class or background, or, you know, we're a different ethnic group. So I've felt the need to contribute to some conversations that I've either overheard, or, you know, a comment that's been passed, or, you know, when we're having a general conversation, to add something which is from the other, because lots of my colleagues don't have that perspective because of just generally where they've grown up or where their friendship group is, or, you know, all these different factors, because we're all coming from very different sections of society when I look at it personally and look at some of my colleagues. So I think it's because I've gained that confidence, and obviously also because, particularly within my large team, I feel like I've gained, you know, a lot of kind of good, strong relationships there, where I do feel comfortable enough to be able to check some of my colleagues in a kind of, you know, friendly, open way. And that's when we have the two-way conversation about something sometimes, and they go, I just never considered it like that for me.
And that comes down to
and that's when I then say, well, that's because, you know, I'm coming at this from being a black woman who grew up in Radford in Nottingham, and you grew up in, you know, wherever in Wiltshire or wherever you were from. So, you know, and that's when we've had that kind of a nice moment actually where something's clicked, or where they've actually just appreciated a different view. That doesn't mean I'm right and you're wrong, or, you know, or whatever. It just means that actually your understanding of a different perspective is quite key, is quite really important. And that's happened to me quite a lot through my career, because I've obviously just worked with people that are quite different to those in my own family or those that I've grown up with, and I've learned things from them. I'm sure they've learned things from me, and it's been quite a two-way process some of the time, because you know, there's lots of things I don't know about, or I've assumed about them, and again, assumptions have been formed and so forth, based on, again, sometimes my own misconceptions and views, and vice versa from their standpoint.
Thank you so much.
Again, no one's obligated to do any of this. This is what it comes back to. No one's obligated. Nobody has to feel like they have to be the spokesperson for everybody black in your team or everybody black in your firm. There's a lot of that pressure that comes with, you know, sometimes the speaking out or the getting involved with the D&I stuff, and, you know, whatever it might well be, you start to feel sometimes like you can be speaking on behalf of your own group or representing your whole group, which is a whole other issue which I won't talk about right now. But in essence, you know, as I said, it's not an obligation on anybody, and all I'm making it clear is that personally I feel like I've come into my own in terms of my confidence, in terms of a number of different things, and that's personally why I felt that I've been comfortable to have some of those conversations, or to check somebody or to call somebody out.
There was a question about microaggressions just in the chat while Corinne was speaking, and I think it you know, microaggressions are interesting because obviously if you called out every single microaggression, I think it's difficult. I think an incredibly insidious form of racism, because if you try and call it out, people will probably disagree with you that there was ever an issue in the first place. And you see that a lot with some of the comments on Alex's post, is that a lot of the comments were, are you sure you didn't just misinterpret it? Are you sure you're not just being oversensitive? And you call someone out on a microaggression, you say, well, I'm not really comfortable, and it's a little thing, and you know, like Ashley said, it sort of builds up. You risk sort of being made to feel even worse. My point is really, I don't think we owe anyone anything to call out microaggressions. If you feel you're able to, please do. But like I said, I wouldn't criticize anyone for feeling like they just don't have it in them to deal with it that way.
It can be mentally exhausting. I know I found that at university, where we had a lot of conversations, and it felt that there would be times where I'd be the spokesperson for every single race that was out there, and it just, whilst trying to do my final year of university. I was just, this isn't what I signed up for. And likewise, as lawyers who are of colour, we didn't sign up to be spokespeople for lawyers of colour. It's just now we're in a situation where I think there were a lot of anxiety about how young junior lawyers are treated in the industry, and obviously hearing about Alexandra as well at the beginning of this week, that adds to the conversation. I think one of the things that's come up a couple of times is knowing your worth, and I think Corinne and Kourjit, you've touched on that. Another thing that's come up a lot is mentorship and the value of mentorship in people's careers and progressing people's careers. Michelle, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more on that in terms of how would a junior lawyer look out for a mentor? How do you foster that relationship?
I think mentorship is really important, but it's separate to sponsorship, which is something else you also need in the workplace. I think mentorship is looking for individuals who you see some kind of similarities with yourself, whether that be in terms of the things that they do, the way they work, someone that you can come alongside, and somebody who is willing to work with you and to have a confidential relationship with, to share the things that you possibly can't share at work. You know, how you felt about a situation. I've done it in the past. Should I call it out as racism? Should I call it as something else? How do I respond? The conversations, you know, the appraisal meeting, speaking to my mentor beforehand, you know, how do I deal with this issue? How do I raise it appropriately? How do I follow it up? Those are the kind of the mentorship conversations. And I think you just need to be in forums like this and go to the networks and meet other lawyers, whoever you get a bond with or somebody that's willing to spend the time with you, use it appropriately to have the mental conversations and the right questions. Personally, for LinkedIn, I never refuse a student or an unqualified person to join them in my network, simply because it's an opportunity for them to hear the conversations that I'm having and others in my network. But I think you also need at the same time sponsorship, which is somebody in your firm or your organisation who can speak on your behalf, who kind of comes alongside you and not necessarily to you, but in the circles at the table where you are not able to have those conversations, who has a seat at the table to speak on your behalf, like Corinne was talking about, access to the right kind of files and the right caseload, somebody who can actually say, bring you to mind and can say, you know what, the next opportunity, she has that, because you need, I got tired very quickly of the metric of you work hard and you will succeed, because that metric doesn't work. That metric never worked, and it has kept a lot of people back in their profession who had gifts and talents and were able to share that, but were not told how the route was to progress and how to advance. And so I think you do need sponsorship and mentorship, and it's unfortunately it's set up that the onus is on the individual to seek out, to find. But I think, you know, like we're sharing tonight as lawyers, there are many lawyers who are willing to have those conversations, whether formally or informally.
Thanks very much. And I think now is a good time to move on to education, and very briefly to just touch on the idea that should workplaces be doing more to educate on issues about race within their firms and chambers and things like that? Should there be any sort of mandatory training? And in terms of just from an SRA point of view, there's only a minimum guideline that firms should encourage equality. And a question that was sent in ahead of today's event was whether we need a tougher approach to this. I'd be interested to hear anyone's thoughts on that.
Yeah, so just to kind of pull up on that point around what a lot of the panel have been saying tonight around kind of sponsors and things like that, I think taking that onus off of the kind of person of colour to be that person shouting about when they've had a microaggression committed against them or something racist has been said to them, that can be such a mental health drain, being that person to be like kind of the warrior for your community in your workplace, when you really just want to go to work. Like, it's not, we're all here because we've experienced that, or we know about it, and we're the ones that understand that it's an issue. It's the ones outside of kind of these groups that don't know that it's an issue, and they're the ones that really should be doing the work rather than the other way around, or us teaching them. And with everything else, we're expected at work to kind of take leadership of our learning and development, and this is just part of that. It's not something that is just, oh, an added extra if you've got time. This should be a core part of their career learning and development plan that's just incorporated with any other kind of KPIs with their job. So absolutely, I think it should be a huge part of kind of the training and development and ongoing kind of appraisals as well. I think to avoid those situations that Malvika mentioned, where it's like, oh, someone can be like, oh, I never said that, I didn't say anything like that, or you're just taking it in the wrong way. Really having like set out examples to the whole team and the whole kind of organization, so that they understand what those microaggressions can look like, how they can impact people, and having a clear understanding of what that might be, so that because a lot of times I do think that some colleagues can just be a bit clueless because they've never had to really check themselves or what they're saying, or think twice about how what they're saying is coming across to others, because no one's ever pulled them up on it before. But understanding that saying this phrase or a phrase similar could be demeaning, or could be kind of considered racist or a microaggression, is going to put the onus back on them again to be like, understand and kind of audit their own language and what they're using at work, and understand that could be perceived as disrespectful. And just like anything else that could be perceived as disrespectful, you should avoid that completely, and you should really kind of work on your vocabulary within the workplace.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think another question that's come up just now, someone said, as a Black person with dyslexia, I feel unable to disclose this to employers as I already have one strike against me. This is how it feels. Is this a wise approach? And I think I myself with learning difficulties have felt this, and I certainly felt this during the training contract process, and indeed disclosing it when I joined a law firm. You almost feel like I have a couple of strikes against me because of the colour of my skin and my gender. And that's so silly, but it is a feeling. And I think one of the questions I have for maybe some of the senior panelists is to say, as supervisors and as more senior lawyers, is training given to your level to deal with that from juniors, you know, that kind of anxiety? Are you sort of taught to check in with your juniors about these things, or is it just an assumption that juniors will come to you if there's an issue on this?
I think you are given that kind of training, to be honest, because I mean, for example, for me coming up as a supervisor of trainees, we have specific, supervisor training, and it does teach you to look out for the a trainee that might be struggling, and the kind of symptoms to look for, because it's true, people don't tend to voice their vulnerabilities or any issues that they might be having, because you've got the idea of, well, if I voice that, I'm going to be held back, and you can understand that. So I think it is on the supervisor, the more senior person, to know the kind of things to look for. Is somebody delaying and getting work in? Is somebody, I don't know, perhaps making the same mistake over and over again, or just a recurring theme that you just keep seeing, and it's like just probing it. And I suppose it's down to the individual. Some people have more compassion than other people. Some people will input more into other people than others will. I think a lot of what we've probably been discussing today, a lot of the things do come from generational issues as well. And I think there is the fact that we're having these conversations now, and the fact that I think a number of firms are setting up various multicultural groups or whatever it might be, means that people are having more and more of these conversations. And I think as the generation probably listening to this panel right now, and people like myself get further and further up, things will change. I understand that does come with time. But I think that is, one thing to bear in mind. I think now this year and probably going forwards, it's going to show that these conversations will stay on the radar, and the more we have them, hopefully things will improve from that perspective as well.
Thank you very much. And I think that actually brings us nicely onto the idea of intersectionality, because there will be multiple systems potentially impacting somebody coming into a law firm or already in a law firm. It doesn't just have to be the idea of race. It could be race and gender. It could be LGBTQ plus and being POC. It could be disability, and as that question pointed out. I'd be interested to know from everyone's different backgrounds whether they think their either chambers or firm recognises the idea of intersectional activism. And so it's a term, for those that don't know, coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. And it basically acknowledges that different systems of oppression can overlap an individual's experience. And it came from a legal case where an African woman was not recognised as being discriminated because at the car dealership where she couldn't get a job, black men were being hired and white women were being hired, but black women weren't being. And the court said, well, you know, race isn't an issue and women aren't an issue here. Look at their employees. I'd be interested to hear if anyone thinks that their firm is or their chambers are doing a good job to recognise the intersect, and if not, what needs to be done and why it's important. Anybody brave enough?
I'd probably say that the majority, this is not to say all, but majority of firms that have kind of set up networks, they are often focused on one strand. So they might have a gender network, they might have a BAME network, they might have an LGBTQ network. And I appreciate why that is needed, and obviously to give, you know, a certain attention to various different issues and various different strategies across the board, across their firms. But where I think there is sometimes a missing link is that intersectionality point, and how firms address that, and what firms do and what networks do to work together to address some of those wider issues is a really important piece. I think there's an acknowledgement that there is a need to do that. I'm just not quite sure that we're as advanced as maybe we would like to be in terms of actually, you know, doing something meaningful in that space as a result. I think a lot of firms are maybe in their infancy in terms of, you know, building momentum of those core networks per se, and so the next stage is building on that and looking at it as more of an intersectional piece and looking at some of those wider issues that come from that as a result. But I'm just generalizing because I've worked with a few firms and had obviously access to looking at and working with some of their networks and looking at it from a strategy piece as well. But yes, there is an acknowledgement, but I think there's a lot more work to be done from an intersectional point of view.
And I think the reason why, so for this topic, we've combined intersectionality and allyship sort of together, and they are very distinct in their own rights. But in a way, in terms of allyship and understanding that there's obviously the listen to POC people, amplify their messages and speak out and up for them when they're not in the room. It's also acknowledging that sometimes as an individual, you might be the perpetrator and you need to recognize your privilege and get comfortable with the discomfort of accepting that there's going to be some privilege there. And that applies to, you know, myself as not a Black individual, as my own socioeconomic background, understanding my own privilege on those fronts. When I was thinking about intersectionality, I was thinking that it is also a way for people that may not be POC to understand how systems of oppression have impacted their own lives. So maybe if they're a woman, or if they're LGBTQ, or if they've got disability, understand how in the workplace and in corporate structures it can impact you, and perhaps then empathize to other people in these situations and understand that just as you would want people to speak out for you and back your corner, in a similar way, you can kind of extend that empathy through and look at this issue through that kind of lens. Does anybody have any experience of sort of allyship in their workplace, or sort of training on allyship, or anything, that conversation coming up? Has that been floated in the past few months at all?
I think
Bridget, you're nodding.
Yeah, I think as Corinne was saying, it does strangely feel that most organisations, and maybe this is a generalised point and somebody can correct me, are in their infancy in terms of, I think there's been a lot in terms of staff networks and the power of staff networks, but in terms of the way in which we are more than just one being, you know, we are a three-dimensional people, I think those conversations are quite interesting, and the word intersectionality has I think just dropped onto our radar, particularly in the last few months.
Right.
It doesn't mean to say that the firm hasn't recognized that, you know, people are, you know, women are carers, mothers, and you know, you're Black and you're a lawyer as well, and you may have a disability. It's not that we're not recognizing it, but I think we're talking more about it. And I think the more people see, more firms speak openly about the issues, flagged by their what we call communities within Brown Jacobson, the more we're going to get comfortable with understanding the differences, and the fact that just because I'm black doesn't mean to say I don't have my own biases, which is your point, Natasha. Doesn't mean just because I've got a protected characteristic that I'm actually holier than thou. I am sure that's not the case. And it is just having that, being open and having an open conversation that people feel safe. But going back to the point about what's our role in educating our firm and our colleagues, I've spoken to many juniors in my organisation, and they're exhausted. They use that word. They're absolutely exhausted, not just within the business, but on social media, in their networks, out externally, talking about, Black Lives Matter. Not because they don't want to talk about it, but because they're perceived as it being the holder of all the knowledge on that particular issue, just because we're black, and we're not. So my mantra has been is very much about, we are not there to teach. We are there to make people aware, but the people who engage are the allies. They're the ones who are always genuinely interested. They're the ones who will come to the meetings and support and advocate and call out. So you're kind of preaching to the converted. They are absolutely critical.
Yeah.
But the people that don't engage, what do you do about those people? I think our role is to make them aware, and if they want to come to the water and drink, they can. But if they don't, I'm not going to expend my energy trying to force somebody to understand. I think it's about making sure that the organizations that we work in and the environment that we work in, that the majority understand and get it, so that everybody else has to come along with it. Whether they're kicking and screaming quietly at home over a glass of wine, I don't care, as long as when they're in the business that they're actually doing the right thing. And it's as simple as that. That's how we see it.
Just to add to that, Bridget, I think as a firm, I think that we do have firms do have a responsibility. So, we've got leaders in our firms, we've got partners in our firms, we've got senior executives in our firms, and they are leading from the front, and as part of doing that, need to be doing the right thing. And this is the right thing to be doing. So if they are deciding not to engage with the conversation, if they are oblivious to some of maybe their own behaviours or actions, then that's part of the root of the problem. So I think it is really important to ensure that there's at least some form of training and awareness being given to seniors, to people that are involved in supervision, involved in recruitment, going to some assessment days and choosing the trainees that are coming through. We need to be conscious of our biases. We need to be aware of a number of different things, so that we're not adding to what are existing issues. And that's essentially why I think the training piece is important, not to, as Bridget was saying, trying to change the mindsets of some of those people who are hanging on by a T to a number of different views. But it's important to give a different perspective, to give a different level of appreciation to a number of things, so that people can hopefully have a wider understanding, which can hopefully on the back of that help with knocking down some of these issues that we do face around recruitment, around retention, around development, around all these different things, which as a group of people in a firm, if we're not all conscious of, we all hinder and contribute to.
There's one thing I'd like to add to that, and it's I was a bit tongue-in-cheek then about if they want to moan behind my back, then so be it. As a firm, we're actually have implemented behavioural models. So because you can teach people, and they will go to whether it's called unconscious bias training or conscious inclusion training now, which is what everybody's speaking about, and you have a half an hour session, and you hope that they will take something away and will engage with the networks on Yammer and so forth. But we're actually now drilling down to behavioural models in terms of leadership. And supporting that through training, so that people know what to expect. It's part of your objective to have EDI and to look at your teams. What do they look like? And you can't sit back and say, well, actually, my pipeline is this. That's why
Correct.
it looks like that.
Mhm.
And actually challenging those leaders within organizations. And I'm sure that, you know, Brown Jacobs isn't the only firm that's actually moved towards that model, because you do actually have to compel, as well as, which goes to that point somebody asked, I think, in the chats about, you know, should we be a lot more firm in terms of the SRA, and I think it's principle 6, isn't it, about equality, and I think just as I think the SRA does need to get some teeth around that principle, and you know, call out businesses that aren't actually doing what they say that they're doing. If you're spending all this money, surely your profile, your demographic within your organizations should look different right the way through its structure.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we talked about this a few moments ago, we were also talking about the pressure that clients can put on businesses to affect change, and you mentioned that pressure can come from clients wanting to see stats, but can it also potentially work in the flip, in that there have been instances, and I know a question did come through about what happens if you've got a client that isn't sort of towing the line, and they themselves are potentially being racist or showing microaggressions or things like that. Do you have any advice for, I think maybe even juniors, but even, you know, each other, about how to handle that? Because obviously that's a sensitive relationship. You might not be the client contact. This might be a referral. Who knows where you jumped on to the transaction. Does anyone have any view on that situation?
I've got an example,
Yeah.
but this is the managing partner called me up, so he's not a junior. He knows, and we had a case where a client, an emergency cropped up and they needed help, but then in terms of doing our conflict search, which shows you how great conflict searches are, a lot of information came up about this person's use of Twitter in a racial, racism and so forth. And he called me and said, Bridget, what do we do? We've got this piece of work. And I said, well, is it an emergency? So it was. So he had to sort that piece of work out, but said that we would know for him not to come back to this firm for any further work. So you can manage it. But as you said, that's somebody senior, having the confidence, even though he was asking me what to do, he actually made the right decision anyway. It was just sense checking it. With juniors, I think you've got to have, Corinne and others chip in, that relationship with your manager, your supervisor, who you report it to, because you shouldn't have that responsibility, I don't think, to be calling out,
to manage yourself.
Yeah, exactly, and calling out a client. That's not your job.
Yeah,
I agree with that. Totally second that. It's about hopefully having a relationship with somebody in your team, whether that's your line manager, whether that's somebody that you work with, day to day on that client, or just somebody else, that you're comfortable to have those conversations with, a mentor, whether it be in that team or not, where you can have that conversation and say, this is what's happened. And that person says, okay, Corinne, leave it with me, or okay, Sarah, leave it with me. And they go and manage that on your behalf. They have that conversation for you with your line manager if you don't want to have it, or with that client partner, or whatever it might well be, because they're advocating on your behalf to manage that. That's not your responsibility. It wouldn't even be my responsibility as a senior associate to manage that situation. I would handle it in my own way, in terms of maybe trying my best to not say something explicit in response, depending on what exactly the situation was, and then just trying to keep my composure and having that conversation, with somebody else, so as not to kind of over escalate the situation. So, trying to handle it best I could with client to the degree I can. I don't know what the circumstances might be, but trying my best to manage that and to kind of keep my emotions and composure to the extent that I can, because again, it might be something that you're really upset about and you might burst into tears about, and that just might be a consequence of what might well be said or done, depending on what happened. And then it's about engaging with somebody else who then manages that situation, and you don't have to get involved. And that's a senior person's role, and that's for them to manage in the right way, and to come back to you and to tell you how that has been managed and what's going to happen as a result. It's not for you to worry about that client relationship. It's not for you to worry about that contact. You know, things will happen, and it's not for you to hopefully get, you know, too worried about. But hopefully you've got somebody who you feel comfortable to have that conversation with, and I think that's the main point there, isn't it, Bridget? Having somebody that you feel that you can go to after that event.
Thank you so much. I'm just mindful of the time, so I think we'll end with one last question, which is something that I think I've actually spoken to a couple of you about. Cordy, I know we've spoken about this recently, and it's just come in now. Has anyone on the panel ever felt the need to adjust, change, or shorten their actual name so that non-POC feel comfortable pronouncing it, or even feel that their name, which recruiters may see first, may impact how their application is viewed? And I know from my own personal experience, I actually go by my middle name, which is Natasha. My first name is Natasha. That's just actually because my family called me that. But my parents' motivation with giving me two names was this question entirely. Has anyone on the panel ever felt this at all, or experienced this?
Definitely wonder if my name disadvantages me, but that almost makes me dig my heels in, and it's like, you know what, they can learn how to say my name. But one of the things I get quite nervous about, and it happened sort of at the beginning of COVID when a lot of my work disappeared overnight, and obviously the way council's instructed is that solicitors will ask who's available for this hearing, your clerks will send a list of the available counsel and their fees, and then they'll pick who they want to go to. And you know, when I absolutely wasn't getting any work at all when the courts first shut down, I was like, oh, you know, are they picking the kind of the Ben Smiths over the Malvika Juggenmohens? Like, is it, you know, is there some kind of subconscious, you know, they just feel more comfortable, it's just easier to tell the client who they're being represented by? I definitely have a thing of my surname's quite long, that I introduce myself as just Malvika, whereas everyone else will go, you know, I'm Miss Roberts or whatever, which I should stop doing. I should start saying I'm Miss But you know what? Don't feel the pressure to have to change your name. I'm so committed to my name now. I've dug my heels so much. I'm convinced that even if I get married, I'd never change my name. I'd keep my professional name. It's going to be my brand. So yeah, just stick with your brand.
Yeah, and I would say, I think adding on that, I think that is a key point that you've just made, that I think you have to be true to you. And I think if you do hide yourself and shrink yourself, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're doing the wider society and community a disservice. So I definitely would say, yeah, if you do have one of those names that you do feel like, oh, what's the recruiter going to think? I don't think you should change it. I think that, you know, the more that those names are seen, then the more things will change. I think what I would say as well is a lot of law firms now are, and if they're not, I know some will soon be doing, is the whole kind of anonymized CV process. So they don't have the names anymore. People aren't looking at the names, so it literally is on the content of the CV. And I think the more that, you know, firms are doing things like that, it does even the playing ground ultimately.
Can I also say
I would sorry.
Sorry, Joel, I didn't mean to speak over you. I just meant to say that there's nothing nicer than having a judge pronounce your name correctly and take the time to learn it properly. I was in front of a judge in Birmingham who hadn't realised that she'd been misspelling part of my name. And when she found out, when I went to get my legal aid form signed, she was so dismayed that I hadn't corrected her over the course of this 4-day hearing that she made it a point to say, you need to tell me if your name is being pronounced incorrectly and I will make sure it's right next time. It means so much just to hear from a judge, you know, Miss Juggenmohen correctly.
And just obviously I made that point just slightly in the chat about judges, but I think Rita, you asked this question, and what I'd say is, I know it's easier said than done, is I wouldn't try not to spend too much of your time worried about whether or not recruiters are going to be so concerned about your name, because quite frankly, if a recruiter is, there's not much you can do. You can't really control that from where you are, and you know, try and spend your energy in places that it might actually be able to make a difference. So if that is happening, we don't really know. We probably won't know right now within this medium. But at your stage, perhaps I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about that. Keep making those applications, keep putting yourself out there, and keep showing people what you can do, and just focus on that part, really.
What a great note to end it on. Thank you so much, Joel. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for donating some of your time to this event. I really appreciate it. And I know so many of our audience members do. Also to the audience, thank you for your great questions and for sending them in ahead of time as well. To the BTSS committee, thanks for all your help backstage. And yeah, we'd love to hear your feedback so we can continue running similar events like this in the new year. I don't want this conversation to end. And so if you've got any feedback, please let us know via email. And I'll give you the rest of your evenings back. Thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.